What started as the most humiliating moment of a billionaire's life became the catalyst for one of the most explosive corporate exposes in American history. All because two 8-year-old girls decided that kindness matters more than pride. Transaction denied. Try another card, announced the attendant at the Shell station on Route 65. Her voice carrying the weary tone of someone who had witnessed this embarrassing scene countless times before. The man standing frozen at pump number 3 wore simple clothes that concealed his true identity. But the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist worth more than most people's annual salary told a different story. Alexander Mitchell, 42 years old, had controlled a technology empire valued at $3.4 billion just 3 weeks ago. That was before he discovered the secret that would change everything. Before he walked away from his corner office. And before his former best friend turned the entire corporate world against him. Now, with his third credit card rejected and 50 increasingly impatient customers forming a line behind his black Mercedes, Alexander felt the crushing weight of their judgmental stares burning into his back. Seriously, this guy drives a Mercedes and can't pay $23 for gas? Someone muttered loud enough for the entire crowd to hear, their voice dripping with disdain. A middle-aged woman laughed dismissively, shaking her head as she recorded the scene on her phone. I bet he's just another one of those fake influencers pretending to be rich for social media clicks. Alexander tried his fourth card, knowing exactly why each transaction was being denied. His accounts hadn't been frozen by banks, they had been deliberately blocked by someone who had discovered his location and wanted to humiliate him in the most public way possible. The attendant's embarrassment was palpable as she cleared her throat. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside and let the next customer. That's when two small voices sliced through the tension like a blade. Cutting silk, we can pay. For him, said to twin girls, approximately 8 years old, speaking in perfect unison as they emerged from behind their family's modest sedan. Grace and Hope Washington wore colorful braids adorned with bright ribbons, and they clutched a small pink purse that jingled with the sound of carefully saved coins. The entire gas station fell into an eerie, uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Girls, get back here right now, their mother's voice called out from inside the car, mortification clear in every syllable. But Grace and Hope possessed the fearless determination that only children can summon. When they believe they're doing something fundamentally right, Grace, the more outspoken of the twins, stepped forward and held up their small purse with both hands. We have $15.60. It's not enough, but she paused, looking at her sister Hope, who nodded with encouraging solemnity. Our grandma always told us that when someone needs help, and you can help even if it's just a little bit, you help them no matter what. Alexander stared at these two extraordinary children and felt something fracture deep inside his chest, a wall he had built around his heart. During 15 years of ruthless corporate warfare, for 3 weeks, he had been treated like a pariah by the same business elite who had once kissed his feet and begged for his attention. Executives who had competed for invitations to his Manhattan penthouse now refused to return his calls. Investors who had practically worshipped at his altar now spread vicious rumors about his supposed mental breakdown. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid acknowledging his existence. And here, at this forgotten gas station in rural Texas, two black children were offering their precious $15.60 to help a white stranger they had never met before, a man who looked like he belonged to the very system that had historically oppressed their community. Diane Washington, the girl's 29-year-old mother and a registered nurse at the local hospital, finally stepped out of their car, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, sir. They're too kind for their own good sometimes. They don't understand that adults need to handle their own problems." Alexander knelt down until he was at eye level with Grace and Hope, his vision blurring as tears threatened to spill for the first time in decades. "What are your names?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Grace," said the first twin, her chin raised with quiet dignity. "And I'm Hope," added her sister, stepping protectively closer to Grace. "Hope and Grace," Alexander repeated, the names feeling like a prayer on his lips. "Do you have any idea how special you are?" The people in line began shifting uncomfortably, some whispering cruel comments about the pathetic spectacle they were witnessing. Others discreetly filmed the encounter with their phones, already crafting the humiliating social media posts that would soon make Alexander a national laughingstock. What none of these strangers could possibly know was that Alexander Mitchell wasn't just another wealthy man experiencing temporary financial difficulties. He was a whistleblower sitting on explosive evidence that could topple governments, destroy criminal empires, and expose a surveillance network that had secretly violated the constitutional rights of 200 million Americans. And in that moment, looking into the innocent, determined faces of Grace and Hope, he made a decision that would ignite one of the most spectacular revenge campaigns in modern corporate history. The photo appeared on social media before Alexander had even left the gas station parking lot. "Bankrupt billionaire needs help from children to pay for gas," blazed across the screen in bold, mocking letters above a viral image showing him kneeling before the two young girls. Within 2 hours, the hashtag billionaire beggar was trending globally on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. The comments section became a feeding frenzy of cruel humor and righteous indignation. This guy controlled a $3 billion company and can't pay $23 for gas. Absolutely pathetic. Poetic justice watching a privileged white man being saved by two black children. Karma in action. The mask has finally come off. This fraud probably never had real money to begin with. But what truly made Alexander's blood boil wasn't the anonymous cruelty from strangers across the internet. It was the text message that arrived at exactly 10:43 p.m. from a phone number he knew by heart, a number that had once been programmed into his contacts under best friend. The message read, "Have you seen the news tonight? It seems your brilliant strategy of disappearing from civilization isn't working quite as well as you planned. Maybe it's time to accept that some secrets are simply too dangerous for one person to handle alone." J.K. Jonathan Kane, his former business partner, closest friend for 15 years, and current CEO of Technocore Industries, was the man who had orchestrated Alexander's exile from the very company he had founded. 3 weeks earlier, Alexander had discovered something in Technocore's classified servers that would fundamentally change how the public understood the relationship between technology corporations and government surveillance. When he had confronted Jonathan about the illegal operations, his oldest friend had smiled with that expression Alexander had taken years to recognize as pure, calculated deception. Alex, you need to understand that certain government contracts require a delicate touch, Jonathan had said, leaning back in his Italian leather chair on the 42nd floor of their Manhattan headquarters. What you've discovered about our algorithms being used for unauthorized mass surveillance cannot and will not be leaked to the press. This operation is too profitable and too strategically important. Jonathan had delivered this ultimatum without even blinking, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings rather than constitutional violations. Now, 3 weeks later, Alexander sat on the edge of a threadbare bed in the Sunset Motel, watching his reputation being systematically demolished. Across every social media platform, each viral post, each humiliating meme, each sarcastic comment was another precisely placed nail in Jonathan's coffin. A coordinated campaign designed to ensure that no credible journalist or law enforcement agency would take seriously any accusations Alexander might eventually make. After all, who would believe a bankrupt billionaire who needed charity from children to buy gasoline? Alexander's phone vibrated again with another message from Jonathan, and this one made his blood run cold. By the way, I just noticed you're staying at the Sunset Motel on Route 65. Charming establishment. I also noticed that those precious little girls who helped you today live somewhere in the area. It would be such a tragedy if something unfortunate happened to their family because of your stubborn refusal to cooperate, don't you think? The threat hit Alexander like a physical blow to his stomach. Jonathan wasn't satisfied with merely destroying his credibility and financial standing. He was now threatening to harm Grace and Hope, to innocent children whose only crime had been showing compassion to a stranger in need. These were the same girls who had demonstrated more genuine humanity in 5 minutes than Jonathan had exhibited during their entire 15-year friendship. What Jonathan King failed to understand was that Alexander Mitchell had not spent the last 3 months simply collecting evidence and hiding in fear. He had been methodically mapping out an entire network of corruption that connected Technocore Industries to high-ranking political figures, intelligence agencies, and multinational corporations operating on 4 different continents. His encrypted files contained names, dates, bank transfer records, audio recordings of classified meetings, and documents that could send 23 powerful individuals to federal prison. For decades, most importantly, Alexander had created a sophisticated security system that Jonathan didn't even suspect existed. A digital dead man's switch connected to investigative journalists at major news outlets in 7 different countries. If anything happened to Alexander, or if he failed to enter his security codes every 72 hours, every piece of evidence would be automatically released simultaneously to reporters who had already verified the authenticity of his claims. But Jonathan's threat against Grace and hope had just transformed this from a battle for justice into a personal war. Alexander was no longer fighting simply to expose the truth. He was fighting to protect two children who represented everything, pure and innocent, that still existed in a world corrupted by greed and power. He opened his laptop and began typing codes he hadn't used in years, activating a network of allies that Jonathan had never discovered: ethical hackers, former Technocore employees with guilty consciences, investigative journalists hungry for the story of a lifetime, and technology experts who shared Alexander's vision of digital transparency. 3 days after Jonathan's veiled threat, Alexander sat in a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of Dallas at 2:15 a.m., the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. The establishment was nearly empty except for an exhausted truck driver nursing black coffee and a waitress mechanically cleaning glasses while chewing gum. When Samantha Torres walked through the door, she looked completely out of place in the grimy environment, but her reputation preceded her. Like a force of nature, Samantha Torres, 38 years old, had earned two Pulitzer Prizes for her fearless exposures of government corruption. Her dark hair was pulled back in a utilitarian bun, and she carried a worn leather backpack containing recording equipment more sophisticated than most major newsrooms possessed. "Alexander Mitchell," she said, sliding into the booth across from him without ceremony. "I honestly thought you were dead, hiding in some non-extradition country, or completely insane." "I thought the same thing about myself for a while," Alexander replied, pushing a thick briefcase across the scratched table toward her, "until I realized that some secrets are too important to die with the people who discover them." Samantha opened the briefcase with practiced efficiency, and her professional composure immediately cracked. Inside were hundreds of documents, contracts, bearing official government seals, bank transfer records, and transcripts of secretly recorded meetings that read like a conspiracy theorist's wildest fantasies, except every single piece of evidence was meticulously documented and verified. "My God," she whispered, rapidly scanning page after page of incriminating evidence. "If even half of this material is authentic, we're looking at systematic violations of the Fourth Amendment, election manipulation, blackmail of public officials, and surveillance operations that would make Orwell's Big Brother look like amateur hour. Every word, every number, every recording is completely authentic," Alexander assured her, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was sharing. "But Jonathan Kane is orchestrating a campaign to destroy my credibility before I can expose any of this. And now he's escalated to threatening innocent civilians specifically, the two children who helped me, as if summoned by their conversation." Alexander's phone buzzed with a notification from Twitter. Another humiliating meme about the billionaire. Beggar had reached 100,000 shares in just 6 hours. This particular post featured a mashup video using audio from the gas station incident, with Grace's sweet voice saying "we can pay for him" transformed into an electronic dance beat while cartoon dollar signs danced across Alexander's face. Jonathan was being systematically, almost artistically cruel, transforming to children's spontaneous act of kindness into a national joke that would follow Alexander for the rest of his life. "I need you to safeguard this evidence," and begin the verification process immediately, Alexander told Samantha, his jaw tight with controlled fury. When we publish this story, it needs to be absolutely bulletproof beyond any possible legal challenge or credibility attack. Samantha nodded, grimly, securing the documents in her backpack. How much time do you estimate we have before Jonathan escalates his tactics? He won't wait much longer, Alexander replied. Every day I remain free and unsilenced represents an existential threat to his empire. But he made one fatal strategic error. He underestimated what happens when you threaten innocent children in front of someone who has the resources and determination to protect them. The following morning, Alexander drove to Riverside Elementary School, a modest red brick building surrounded by a simple but well-maintained playground, where children's laughter echoed across the Texas countryside. He didn't approach Grace and Hope directly. That would have been inappropriate and potentially dangerous given the circumstances. Instead, he requested a meeting with Principal Dorothy Washington, a 55-year-old educator who had devoted 3 decades of her life to nurturing young minds in underserved communities. Mrs. Washington recognized him immediately from the viral social media posts, where her expression showed curiosity rather than the disdain he had encountered everywhere else. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, gesturing for him to sit in the worn chair across from her desk. "Grace and Hope told me about their encounter with you. They're very proud that they were able to help someone in need." "They did far more than help me," Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. "They reminded me of the person I used to be before I lost myself in corporate power games and financial manipulation. But I'm here because I believe they may now be in serious danger because of their connection to me." The principal's expression immediately shifted to protective concern. "What kind of danger are we talking about, Mr. Mitchell?" Alexander chose his words with extreme care, knowing that he was walking a delicate line between honesty and causing unnecessary panic. "There are powerful individuals who view me as a threat to their illegal operations. They may attempt to use anyone connected to me as leverage, including innocent children who simply showed kindness to a stranger. I want to hire discreet security personnel for this school, upgrade your monitoring systems, and establish an educational trust fund to ensure that nothing happens to any student here." Principal Washington studied his face intently, searching for signs of deception or mental instability. "Mr. Mitchell, our district doesn't have the budget for the kind of security improvements you're describing." "I'm not requesting funding from the school district," Alexander interrupted gently. "I'm offering to personally finance $250,000 in security enhancements, plus a college scholarship fund for every student currently enrolled at Riverside Elementary. This isn't charity, it's protection for children who may have inadvertently become targets because they chose to help a stranger." Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Manhattan, Jonathan Kane was conducting a strategy meeting with his most trusted executives. On the 42nd floor of Technocore Tower, the panoramic view of New York City stretched endlessly before them. But Jonathan's attention was completely focused on his laptop screen, where he monitored the engagement metrics of every humiliating post about Alexander's gas station encounter. The company's stock price has increased by 3% since we initiated this social media campaign, reported David Chen, Technicore's director of digital marketing. The narrative that Alexander has suffered a complete mental breakdown is gaining widespread acceptance. No legitimate news organization will take seriously any accusations he might attempt to make against us. Jonathan smiled with cold satisfaction, his fingers drumming against the polished conference table. Excellent work. What's the status of our other security measures? Marcus Webb, Technicore's head of corporate security and a former CIA operative, consulted his encrypted tablet. We have comprehensive surveillance on Mitchell's location, communications, and daily activities. We know where he's staying, who he's been meeting with, and every move he's planning to make. If the situation requires escalation, we can expand our operations to include indirect pressure on third parties. Third parties? Jonathan repeated thoughtfully. You mean the families of those children who helped him? Sometimes indirect pressure can be far more effective than direct confrontation. He paused, considering the moral implications for exactly 3 seconds before dismissing them entirely. Jonathan had built his empire on calculated, ruthlessly practical decisions where human emotions were simply variables in complex equations. To innocent children were just collateral damage. In a much larger war, do whatever becomes necessary, he finally declared, his voice devoid of any trace of conscience. But keep all operations completely untraceable. Nothing can lead back to Technicore or any of our subsidiaries. What Jonathan didn't realize was that Alexander had anticipated exactly this escalation. During the past 3 days, he hadn't been cowering in fear or plotting his escape. He had been installing sophisticated tracking viruses into Technicore's internal systems, using backdoor access codes he had personally created years earlier. When the company was still legitimately his, every email Jonathan sent, every meeting recorded by corporate devices, every suspicious financial transaction was being automatically copied to secure servers that Alexander controlled remotely from his motel room. Jonathan thought he was hunting a defeated enemy, but he was actually providing evidence for his own prosecution with every move he made. That evening, Alexander received an encrypted call from Samantha Torres that made his blood turn to ice. Alexander, you need to see what I've just intercepted from Technicore's internal communications. They're planning a coordinated harassment campaign against the children who helped you. Alexander's hands clenched into fists as she continued. Nothing overtly violent. They're too smart for that. Instead, they're planning bureaucratic harassment of the families, artificial financial pressure, social media manipulation, and psychological intimidation designed to make these people's lives unbearable. Until you emerge from hiding to protect them, then they'll document your intervention as evidence that you're exploiting children to rehabilitate your public image. The diabolical brilliance of Jonathan's strategy was breathtaking in its cruelty. He was creating a situation where any attempt Alexander made to protect Grace and Hope would be twisted into evidence of manipulation and emotional exploitation. There's something else you need to know, Samantha continued, her voice grim. I've traced some of the social media accounts that have been amplifying the humiliating posts about you. This isn't just Technocore acting alone. There are at least 4 other major corporations involved in this campaign, including 2 subsidiaries of international media conglomerates. For 15 years, Alexander had been building more than just software and corporate wealth. He had cultivated relationships with engineers he had mentored, journalists who respected his commitment to technological ethics, hackers who shared his ideals about digital transparency, and entrepreneurs who believed technology should serve humanity rather than exploit it. This invisible network of allies represented his true power, a resource that Jonathan had never suspected existed because it couldn't be measured in stock prices or quarterly earnings reports. Alexander opened his laptop and began typing code he hadn't used since his early days as a programmer, back when he still believed that technology could make the world a better place. It was time to activate his network and demonstrate to Jonathan Kane that weaponizing the kindness of innocent children had been the most catastrophic strategic error of his entire corporate career. What those executives sitting in their glass towers fundamentally failed to understand was that some battles transcend traditional business logic and enter the realm of primal human instincts about protecting the innocent. When you awaken that protective force in someone who possesses not only vast resources, but also insider knowledge of your criminal activities and a secret network of allies willing to fight for justice, you discover that corporate warfare has rules, and threatening children violates every single one of them. The Technocore Industries board meeting was scheduled to begin at exactly 9 a.m. when every executive's smartphone simultaneously erupted with urgent notifications. Jonathan Kane stared at his screen and felt the blood drain from his face as if someone had opened a valve. Explosive revelations. Former Technocore CEO exposes mass surveillance scheme, violating privacy rights of 200 million Americans, dominated the headlines of not just the Washington Herald, but 15 of the nation's most influential media outlets. Jonathan, are you seeing this? Marcus Webb burst through the conference room doors, clutching his laptop, his usually composed demeanor completely shattered. They have everything: classified contracts, recordings of our private meetings, bank transfer records, even our internal email correspondence from the past 3 months, including your personal threats against those children. Jonathan's hands trembled uncontrollably as he scrolled through page after page of leaked documents that represented every illegal decision he had made, every unethical compromise he had authorized, and every threat he had issued against Alexander and innocent civilians. The most damaging piece of evidence was audio recording of his own voice saying, "It would be such a tragedy if something unfortunate happened to their family because of your stubborn refusal to cooperate. Don't you think?" Words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Within 60 minutes, #TechnoCoreFiles was trending worldwide across every social media platform. The audio clip of Jonathan threatening children had been played millions of times, accompanied by outraged comments from parents, teachers, and child advocacy groups around the globe. Samantha Torres appeared live on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News simultaneously, holding thick stacks of documentation. What the American people are witnessing today is not merely ordinary corporate corruption. She announced to the camera, We are exposing a systematic blackmail operation involving high-ranking political figures, algorithmic manipulation designed to influence democratic elections, and illegal surveillance programs that have collected personal data from hundreds of millions of citizens without their knowledge or consent. There was no possibility of damage control or strategic spin. Alexander had been methodically thorough. In his preparation, every document included verifiable metadata proving its authenticity. Every audio recording had been certified by independent digital forensics experts, and every financial transaction had been traced across multiple international jurisdictions by forensic accountants. By 3:15 p.m., Technicor's stock price had plummeted 42%, wiping out billions of dollars in market value. By 4 p.m., FBI agents were executing search warrants at every Technicore facility across the United States. By 5 p.m., Jonathan Kane was being escorted from the building he had controlled for 3 years, carrying only a cardboard box containing his personal belongings, while news cameras captured every humiliating step of his walk of shame. But Alexander had saved his masterstroke for prime time. That evening, during the national news hour when viewership peaked, Grace and Hope appeared in an exclusive interview alongside their family, Diane Washington. Their mother spoke directly into the camera with the quiet dignity of someone who had raised children to see the humanity in every person they encountered. My daughters taught everyone watching tonight that kindness recognizes no boundaries of race, social class, or bank account balance. They helped a stranger because their grandmother taught them it was simply the right thing to do. The fact that wealthy executives responded to that kindness by threatening our family reveals exactly why we need more people like Mr. Mitchell fighting for justice in this world. 8-year-old Hope added her own wisdom with the startling clarity that sometimes emerges from young minds. Our teacher says that bad people are only bad because they've forgotten how to be good. Maybe watching this will help them remember. The interview was viewed by 68 million people within 24 hours, shared across social media platforms by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens who were moved by the stark contrast between childhood innocence and corporate evil. Jonathan watched the entire broadcast from his brother's apartment in Newark, New Jersey, where he was hiding from the relentless media circus surrounding his downfall. Every word spoken by Grace and Hope pierced through the emotional armor he had constructed during decades of ruthless business practices, awakening a conscience that had been dormant since his early days. As an idealistic computer science student, his phone had stopped ringing entirely. No executives wanted their names associated with his toxic reputation. His personal bank accounts had been frozen by federal investigators. His wife had changed the locks on their Hamptons estate and served him with divorce papers through her attorney. The final blow came in the form of a text message sent to his personal phone at 11:47 p.m. Jonathan, I hope today taught you something valuable about the consequences of threatening innocent children. I didn't destroy your empire out of revenge or personal hatred. I did it to protect 2 little girls who demonstrated more humanity in 5 minutes than you have shown in 15 years of corporate leadership. The fundamental difference between us has always been simple. I use whatever power I possess to protect the innocent, while you use yours to threaten and exploit them." Alexander attached to the message was a photograph that would torment Jonathan's dreams. For years to come, Grace and Hope playing on their school playground, laughing and running with their classmates, completely oblivious to the fact that their spontaneous act of kindness had triggered one of the most spectacular corporate implosions in American business history. Jonathan stared at that image until his phone battery died, finally understanding that he had catastrophically underestimated not only Alexander Mitchell's resources and determination, but the transformative power of genuine compassion when it's protected by someone with the means and motivation to defend it. The man who had thought he controlled empires through fear and manipulation discovered that some battles operate according to rules that transcend quarterly earnings and stock prices. They touch something fundamental about the human obligation to protect those who deserve protection. 6 months later, Alexander Mitchell sat in a modest but comfortable office in Austin, Texas, serving as executive director of the Grace and Hope Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting whistleblowers and exposing corporate corruption across multiple industries. Instead of Manhattan's skyscrapers, his office window overlooked a vibrant community playground where children of every background played together. Under the warm Texas sun, "Mr. Mitchell, we've received 43 new corruption reports this week alone," announced Sarah Chen, his assistant and a former Technocore software engineer who had joined his course. After witnessing the devastating expose, also the documentary about Grace and Hope's story premieres on Netflix next month, and preliminary audience research suggests it could reach over 100 million viewers worldwide. Alexander smiled genuinely for the first time in months, adjusting the framed photograph on his desk that showed Grace and Hope receiving the Young Citizens of the Year award from the governor of Texas. The two girls had become national symbols of courage, compassion, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. Their story was being taught in schools, discussed in churches, and referenced by politicians seeking to restore faith in American values. Meanwhile, 1,600 miles away, Jonathan Kane sat in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Detroit, scrolling through freelance job postings on his laptop. No technology company would hire him. His name had become synonymous with corporate corruption and child intimidation. Former colleagues avoided him as if his mere presence could contaminate their own reputations. The phone rang, displaying his attorney's number with the persistence of an unwelcome debt collector. "Jonathan, I have the final plea bargain terms from the federal prosecutors," his lawyer announced without preamble. "They've agreed to accept your cooperation, but the minimum sentence is still 12 years in federal prison. Additionally, your ex-wife is seeking retroactive alimony payments that could bankrupt whatever assets you have remaining." Jonathan hung up and stared at the television screen, where a commercial was advertising the upcoming documentary series, Little Heroes, Big Changes, featuring Grace and Hope as they taught children across America about kindness, social justice, and standing up for what's right. What tormented him most wasn't the impending prison sentence or financial ruin, it was the knowledge that 2 8-year-old girls had demonstrated more moral integrity in 5 minutes than he had exhibited during his entire executive career. On the same day, Alexander visited Riverside Elementary for the grand opening of their new digital library, funded entirely by the Grace and Hope Foundation. The moment he stepped onto campus, Grace and Hope ran toward him with the uninhibited joy that only children can express. Still somewhat shy about all the national attention their story had generated. "Mr. Alexander," Grace called out, throwing her arms around his waist. "Our teacher told us that your foundation helped other kids like us all across the country." "No," Alexander replied, kneeling down to meet them at eye level, his voice filled with profound gratitude. "You two started this entire movement. I simply amplified the kindness you showed to a stranger who desperately needed to remember what really matters in life." Hope reached into her small backpack and pulled out a familiar pink purse. "We still have that $15.60 saved up," she announced proudly, "just in case someone else needs help again." Alexander laughed through tears that he no longer tried to hide, understanding that these children had taught him the most valuable lesson of his life. "Keep that money safe," he told them. "You've already shown me that the most powerful gestures in this world come from the purest hearts." The Grace and Hope Foundation processed more than 200 reports of corporate corruption during its first operational year, resulting in billions of dollars in federal fines and the arrest of dozens of corrupt executives across multiple industries. Alexander discovered that his true wealth had never been measured in bank account balances or stock portfolios. It was found in his ability to transform moments of personal humiliation into movements for social justice that protected vulnerable people from institutional exploitation. Jonathan Cain was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. During his final court appearance, when the judge asked if he had any statement to make before sentencing, he looked directly into the television cameras broadcasting the proceedings live. "Two children taught me more about morality and human decency than any business school ever could," he said, his voice breaking with genuine remorse. "I hope that someday, after I've served my time and attempted to make amends for the harm I've caused, I might be worthy of their forgiveness." Alexander's story proves a profound truth. When you lose everything you thought defined your worth and success, sometimes the universe sends 2 8-year-old angels to show you what actually has value in this life. The most powerful revenge isn't destroying those who have wronged you, it's building something so positive and transformative that their injustices become irrelevant in the face of the good you're able to create. In the end, Jonathan Cain's attempt to humiliate and silence Alexander Mitchell backfired spectacularly, elevating him to a purpose far greater than anything he had achieved as a billionaire CEO. The story of Grace and Hope reminds us that sometimes the greatest heroes are only 8 years old, carry $15 in their pockets, and understand something about human dignity that adults spend lifetimes trying to remember. That helping others isn't about having enough, it's about having enough heart to try.